and welcome to the Zero Ends channel. Please like and subscribe. Please enjoy our live.
Hello, and welcome again to another reading of American Negro Slave Revolts. This is Chapter 11, Section 2. Thank you for listening to this podcast and listening to this stream. And as you know, we wind down to the last few chapters in this great book by Herbert Aptheker. And if y'all know the history of this particular book, this book came out somewhat in the 80s, I believe. No, it was been republished, reprinted like so many times I can't even keep track. Alright, as I was reading this, and actually this was published in the 40s, like around 1943. So next couple years, this will mark the 80th anniversary of this book by Herbert Aptheker. So, like always, it'd be better for anybody that is an avid reader to read it for themselves. So, but nonetheless, we could get started. Before anything, make sure you go back and like this video, share this video with your loved ones, your children, your teenagers, because this is more of a depictive understanding of history. Because, like always, history is not being taught well enough in its holistic form here in the West we call America, or anywhere globally. But for the sake of conversation, here they don't really teach actual history. And as y'all know, with the certain current events that we're facing right now here in this country, and not this country but globally, history has actually proven, without shadow of doubt, repeat itself through either epidemics to policy to everything that you see up here. There's nothing new under the sun. History is what it is. What has happened in the past has always shown in the present, and will keep going on onto the future. So if you have not learned, I think you got a better understanding now. By understanding a little bit more about history, you get more appreciation of how the world really works and where the world actually is going. So, that's a little disclaimer to leave out there. We can now begin, people. And like always, get the book for yourself. Chapter 11, Section 2. As we continue. A large body of militants was ordered out to exterminate these contrasts and thus relieve the neighboring inhabitants from a state of perpetual anxiety and apprehension, than which nothing can be more painful. During the next few weeks, there were occasionally reports of the capturing of outlaws, culminating on June the 25th in the capture of a leader himself, Bob Forby, who it was declared has been a fugitive for 6 years. He was executed 1 month after capture. An order of this year, runaway Negroes near Pines Valley, South Carolina, were attacked. Several were captured, and at least 2, a woman and a child, were killed. One of the Maroons was decapitated and his head stuck on a pole, publicly exposed as a warning to vicious slaves. The inhabitants of Edgecombe County, North Carolina, were much distraught in December of 1825 by the painful discovery of an insurrectionary plot or insurrection among the blacks, who seemed to have believed that the national government had actually set them free. The patrol was strengthening. The militants called out, and a conspiracy crash but when that meant in humans term does not appear. In September 1826, Edward and Howard Stone, slave traders of Bourbon County, Kentucky, of 10 years experience together with two hired men, David Copp and Humphrey Davids of Lexington, were transporting 77 slaves down the Ohio River for sales in the Deep South. One other white man, James M. McRae of Mud Valley, Mississippi, was aboard the boat as a passenger. About 90 miles south of Louisville, the slave, in some manner, broke out of their confinements and, armed with clubs, axes, and knives, succeeded in killing the 5 white men. They then approached some money, sank the boat, and made their way to Indiana. All were reported as captures, and 5 were publicized, executed on November the 29th, 1826, while most of the others were sold into the South. So they capture them and they resell them. Imagine that. The same year, 29 slaves being skipped from Maryland to Georgia abroad. The dictators, owned by Austin Woodfolk, one of the nation's leading slave traders, rebelled, killed 2 members of the crew, and commanded another to take them to Haiti. The boat was captured and taken into New York, where in some unexplained way every one of the rebellion escaped. However, William Browser was later caught and executed in New York City on December 15, 1826. The occurrence moved the famous anti-slavery publicist Benjamin Laud to denounce Mr. Woolfolk's work upon the latter, so beat up the former as to incapacitate him for several days. Lumiden sued Woodfolk, and the Baltimore County awarded him damage totaling $1. A new item dated New Orleans, October 7, 1826, read, "We have been informed that disturbance of rather a delicate nature had taken place at 3 plantations on the coast above. Captain Harney, with a detachment of United States troops provisioned for 3 days, left the city last evening and will no doubt put matters on their former footing." A couple of days later, however, it was asserted that these military movements had been performed merely for purpose of drills and exercise, so that the truth concerning this matter is obscured. The existence of brothersome Maroons at about the same time in South Carolina is established by the fact that in January of 1827, 2 cases appear in a court of that state revolving around the killing of 2 outlying Negroes. In one case, the action of the man firing the fatal shots was declared properly, on the grounds that there were certain runaways Negroes in the neighborhood who were committing murder and other outrage which kept the country in such a state of alarm. The other case also concerns a man who had been one of a party who went in search of some runaway Negroes who had been very mischievous in the neighborhood and had killed one of the rebels. A lady in Georgia wrote to a friend in New York on June 6, 1827, as follows. I'm going to get my voice. "A most dangerous and extensive insurrection of the blacks was detached at Maroons or Macon a few days since. They had banded together to the number of 300 and were supposed to be instigated and headed by a French emigrant from the Mississippi. His slaves were in the plot. They had only arrested one of the rebels, the whole of the others, with the Frenchmen having made their escape. Where slaves might disappear to in this uncanny fashion is indicated in a report that came from Alabama about 2 weeks later. A nest of runaways Negroes was discovered last week in the fork of the Alabama and Tombigbee River by a party from the upper end of Mobile County, consisting of 5 individuals are maimed, and some others of the Negroes were attacked, and after a few severe actions, they were conquered. 3 Negroes were shot, several were taken prisoner, and others escaped. They had 2 cabins and were about to build a fort. The encampment is probably broken up entirely. Some of these Negroes had been runaways several years and had committed many depictions of the neighboring plantations. They fought desperately. A later report declares that had they built the fort, a great number of Negroes in the secret were to join them, and it's in though that in that event they could not be taken without bringing cannons to bear upon them. One of the whites in this engagement wrote June 15 in part, "This much I can say, that old Hal, a leader of the Maroons, and his men fought like Spartans. Not one gave an inch of ground, but stood, was shot, dead, and wounded, fell on the spot. The Negro's man, Papete, who is now living, tired to get his gun fresh printed to shoot after he was shot through the thigh. Because of the poor equipment of the slaves, only one white was wounded." In November of the same year, a Negro woman returned to his master in New Orleans after an absence of 16 years. She told of a Maroon settlement some 8 miles north of the city, contained about 60 people, a drought prevailing at the time, so it was felt that the uncommon dryness had made time, so it was felt that the uncommon dryness had made these retreats attainable. And we are told there is another camp about the head of the Bayou Benevura, policy and provision called for a thorough search and the destruction of all such repairs, whoever found to exist. Beginning in 1829, a persistent thought of 1831, there prevailed a period of extraordinary rebelliousness, suspicious fires, frequent attributions to slaves occurring in Mobile and in Hudson Valley, Alabama, in January and February of 1829. Early in April, in Savannah and Augusta, Georgia, several attempts at arson were made. At the end of the month, a disastrous fire swept Augusta and destroyed much of the armed stores there. This moved Governor John Forsyth to send on May 6 an urgent appeal to the Secretary of War, John Eaton, for arms to protection the people of the state in case of slave revolts. And on the same day, he went a note to W. Montgomery in commanding of the militants at Augusta to be on his guard. An English visitor on Augusta early in 1830 wrote, and this is what he wrote: "There was a great fire in this city in the month of April lasting of 1829. The fire was believed to be the works of incendiaries amongst the people of color. One slave, a female, was convicted, executed, dissected, and exposed, but she died denying the crime. Another, new with a child, is sentenced to be executed in June of 1830, but she still denies her guilt. If I fear these unhappy creatures are convicted on what we should consider very insufficient evidence. And there's subtitles which y'all can read when you get the book. Others fires of incendiary origins occurring in the same city in October and November of that year, as well as Frankendorf Fort, Kentucky, and Camden, South Carolina, and the later destroying 85 buildings. A terrific fire swept, New Orleans, January 13, 1830, causing damages estimated at $300,000. The flames were discovered to burst out almost simultaneously on all sides of the square, which leaves no doubt of its being the work of malicious design. That one resident at the time felt it was the malicious design of the slave is clear for he to write. The evils of this infernal system are beginning to react upon the Christians, who are later in a constant state of alarm, fearing the number and disposition of their blacks, which threaten at no distant period to overwhelm the South with some dreadful calamity. 3 incendiary fires took place in New Orleans during the month of January 1830. I remained in the city, by which several thousand hail of cottons were consumed. The condition of the slaves of the sugar and rice plantation is truly wretched. The Maryland Center Valley Times of July 10, 1830 asserts that 2 houses had recently been burned in Cambridge in the state, and about 50 blacks have been committed to prisoners. The Eastern Gazette, however, minimized the seriousness of the trouble and merely states that since the citizens and taking proper measures to investigate these infamous designs, we forbear at present to give any further particular. The slaves did not restrict themselves to fire. Early in 1829, disaffection was reported from Louisiana. According to the press, there has been a rising of the slaves on certain plantations about 40 miles from New Orleans up the coast. It creates a general alarm, but was speedily suppressed, and 2 of the ringleaders hung at about the same time. On March 17, 1829, Adjutant General Rogers Jones wrote to the command officer, United States Army, as Baton Rouge, from Washington, as follows. And that's what he quotes. From the delinquitude exhibited by the authorities and inhabitants of Louisiana on account of the insurrectionary spirit manifesting by the black population in that state, it is deemed proper by the execution letter torn, and hold yourself in readiness to cooperate with the governor of that state in maintaining order and suppressing any attempts of blacks to put into execution one word illegitimately evil designs. The general and chief directs that you will address a letter to the governor of the state of Louisiana in New Orleans, informing him of the receipts of these instructions, and furnish him a return of the force under your command. You will the letter torn, governor of Louisiana, may think proper to give in relations to this subject. The agitations of Western Virginia for a greater share in the governing of the state, which was accompanied by much talks about liberty and equality, and which culminate in the Constitutional Convention of 1829 through 1830, seem to have been taken seriously, or perhaps one should say seem to have been misinterpreted by the slaves, and to have inspired them to plan their own liberation. News of this leaked out, and fear became widespread. Consonance with the multiplying of the alarms came that a report of the killing of one white and wound of another in Hanover County on July 4th by about 8 slaves. On August 4th, 1829, Governor Gales submit the following preamble and advised to the Council of Virginia, which the broad adopt. And this is what he said. The execution have received secondary communication from different and distant quarters of the state, which speaks of rumor and alarms of an intent insurrection of slaves on or about the first, and which has spread widely and disquiet of the mind of many of the good citizens of the Commonwealth. These rumors have been much talked of by slaves themselves, and have probably increased the spirit of insubordination. Such a spirit has certainly existed. It is believed, however, in a small degree in some of the counties. Therefore, it is advised that arms be distributed to one volunteer company belonging or attack to each regiment of militants in the state, within the bonds of which the number of slaves is so great as to give just cause to apprehend danger of insurrection, or make improper to adopt measures of precaution. A committee was set up to determine which counties fell into this category, and 3 days later, the newly appointed body advised the arming by the state of volunteers companies in practically every county of Eastern Virginia, from Amela to Westmoreland, 59 in all, and in the cities of Petersburg, Norfolk, Lynchburg, and Richmond, an area which population was estimated at 459,324 whites and about 421,019 Negroes. These energetic measures and the great show of strength that accompanies and follows them appears to have effectively blocked, for the time being, any nurturing of the plan of the slaves. South Carolina planters also had their difficulties this year. In the summer, a large gang of runaway Negroes who had infested the parish of Christ Church and St. James for several months and committed serious depredations on the properties of the planters, was accidentally discovered by a party of deer hunters. One of the Negroes was wounded and 4 others were captured. Several escaped, but the Charleston Mercury hoped the citizens would not cease their exertions until the evil shall be effectively removed. The New York Evening Post of August 28th, 1929 contains this very interesting item, and it's read. The alarming conspiracies detailed in the following articles taken from the New Haven Con, advising in news to as the Southern papers do not notice the circumstance. We learn by a letter received in a neighboring town that a dangerous conspiracy was formed amongst the blacks at Georgetown, SC, to massacre the whites. The plan was matured in all its details, and that time fixed for its execution with such secrecy that no doubt can be entertained of this certain and terrible success, had not one of the conspirators proven that the faint of heart and betrayed the enterprise. About 20 of the ringleaders had been arrested, and residue of the slave disarming and a very active and vigilant police system adopts to discontinue or disconcert any further measures of the slave may attempt. Other evidence established the fact that this plot was several months old by the time it reached the northern press. Thus, it is clear that sometime in April, General Joseph W. Austin, a masquerading in Georgetown and a commander of the militants, had written the Attorney General of the state, James L. Peregrine, asking for legal advice in connections with the rebel trials. It appears too that troops and arms have been rushed to Georgetown from Charleston and that the entire state was alarmed. On April 17, 1829, Miss Pettigrew wrote General Austin that he regrets the letter laboring has been as abracious. I am afraid you will hang half the country. You must take care and save Negroes enough for the rice crops. It is to be confessed that your proceedings had not been bloody as yet, but the length of the investigation alarmed as with apprehension, and you will be obligated to punish a great many. Amongst the leaders in this movement, all slaves were Charles Pattereau, Nat Robert, and Quidco. It is known only that the last name was banished. His master tried to retain his property on the grounds that the court would have sentenced him, had not met until 12 days after his arrest, though the law of 1754, let's hear this good, required that it in such case to meet within 6 days. The higher court's reason for rejecting this plea was revealing. When the dreadful consequence of insurrection of slaves in South Carolina are taken into consideration, said the judge, it appears to me that the judge of the superior courts ought to be extremely cautious in interfering with the magistrating and foreholders. Moreover, the judge of the lower courts had been ill, and so postponement was necessary. And besides, it was discovered that so many were concerned in the plot that the public safety required this delay in order to find out the ramifications. One August morning in 1829, 2 male slaves in a coffin of 90 men, women, and children recently bought in Maryland and being led to the South for sale, suddenly dropped their shackles at a point between Green Map and Vincennesburg, Kentucky, and began to deal blows to each other. William B. Petty, one of the 3 white men leading and guarding this valuable group of humans, rushed up at them with his whip, ordering them to fall back into line. Instantly, it became clear that in some way the shackles of each of the men slaves had been filed through, and they set upon and killed Mr. Petty, another of the guard, Gabriel T. Allen, coming to the later aid, was also killed, and the owner, a well-known slave trader named Henry Gordon, was then attacked. He, however, with the assistance of a slave woman, managed to mount a horse and through pursuit made good on his getaway and rounded up aid. The pose, thus formal, is reported to have succeeded in capturing all the slaves, and 6 of the rebel leaders, 5 of them were women, or actually 5 men and 1 woman, were sentenced to hang. The woman was found to be pregnant and permitted to remain in jail for several months until after the birth of the child. Whereas upon May the 25th, 1830, she was publicly hanged. The men were executed November 20th, 1829. The Portsmouth, Virginia Times declared that they all maintained to the last and the utmost firmness and resignation to their fate. There are several address and simulate multitude in which they attempt to justify the deed they had committed. According to Niles, one of the condemned Negroes, the instant before he was launched from the cart, examined or exclaimed, "Death, death at any time, I preference to slavery." Early in April 1830, a conspiracy was reported from New Orleans, and the leader, 2 slaves, were executed. In July, dread of insurrection prevailed in the around Dorchester, Maryland, as had already been observed to report by discovery of the Walker appeals began to recur in Georgia, Louisiana, and North Carolina. At about that time, he added to the concern of the master class. In September, plots were reported from Wilmington, North Carolina, and from Nashville, Tennessee. The next month, a conspiracy embracing about 100 Negroes, and including a few who were free, was discovered in Paliquinines, a parish in Louisiana, south of New Orleans. 2 companies of militants were pressed into service, with the result that the ringleader were arrested, and it was reported were to be punished. Maroons were important factors in causing slave insubordination to Oslo, Jones, Sampson, Blyden, New Hanover, and Dublin County, North Carolina, from September through December 1830. Citizens of the last 4 counties petitioned that the legislature of December 14th for aid because their slaves are becoming almost uncontrollable. They go and come when and where they please, and if an attempt is made to stop them, they immediately fly to the woods, and there continues for months and years, committing depredation of our cattle, hogs, and sheep. And said the petitioners, patrols are of no use of accounts of the dangers of that such themselves, to citing the fact that 2 patrolmen not long since had their dwelling house and other house burnt down. In these areas, militant bodies were strengthened and patrols pressed very frequently into service. One of these outlaws, Moses, who had been a fugitive for 2 years, was captured in November. From him was exiled the information that an uprising was imminent, that the conspirators had armed and ammunition secretly, that they had runners or messengers to go between Wilmington, New Bern, and Elizabeth City to carry word and reports to there that there was a camp in Dover swamps of 30 or 40, another about Gaston Island, and Princeton Creek, several of Newport Rivers, several near Wingleton. Arms were found in the place named by Moses. Oh, and there's a little small subsection here. Let me read this small subsection. In possession of the white woman living in a very retired situation, also some meat hid away and could not be accounted for. A child whom a party of citizens found a little way from the horse or from the house said that the many dressed virtually every day for 4 or 5 runways. It screwed the spot where the meat was then hid and where it was found. The place or camp of Dover was found. A party of neighboring discovered the camp burned 11 horse houses and made such discoveries as convicted them. It was a place of rendezvous for the number, and suppose they killed several of the Negroes. And here the newspaper accounts indeed referred to the wholesale shooting of fugitives. Thus, in the item dated Milton, North Carolina, December 25th, 1830, ran as following. And it says, "We have learned from authorities of the most undoubtful kind that the inhabitants of New Breed, Talbot, Hillsborough, and their vicinities are considerably excited with the anticipation of insurrections, movements among their slaves. Our informants just from the later place state that considerable consternations existed among the citizens, that they have proved arms and ammunition and a vigilantly patrolling every exposed positions. The inhabitants of Newburgh, being advised of the assemblage of 60 armed slaves in a swamp in their vicinity, the militants were called out and surrounded the swamps, killed the whole number. It appears from various rumors that Christmas morning have been selected as the period of rebellious motions." From Wellington on January 7, 1831, came the report, "There has been much shooting of Negroes in these neighborhoods recently, in consequence of symptoms of liberty having been discovered among them. These inhuman acts are kept profoundly secret, wherefore I know not. 2 companies of the troops have very little or very lately been stationed here. In Mississippi, 2 of the Wood Valley Republicans, on the day of the birth of the humble Prince of Peace, report slave conspiracy, especially in Jefferson County, but apparently the only overt occurrence as it increased in the number of fugitive slaves. A government document briefly states the essential fact in this period from early 1831 to the Turner outbreaks of August. The years of 1831 was one of the usual uneasy throughout the slave-holding sections of the country. Consequently, upon an apparently rising of Negroes, early in the spring of the year, strong and urgent representations were made to the war departure of the authorities of Louisiana that a revolt was threatening by the slave and that the presence of military forces in New Orleans was necessary to the preservation of order and the alley of apprehension of the people. To quiet these fears, 2 companies of inferiores were sent to that the city of order were given to neighboring posts to hold the troops in readiness for any emergencies. Later in the same season, similar reports of disorderly conduct upon the part of the slaves came from Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and Carolina. In order that the disposition force might be available to afford protection to such parts of the country as might require it. The garrison of Fort Moro, Virginia, was augmented by five companies drawn from the northern seaboard. The federal military activity was far from the only precautionary measures adopted by the slave crazy as a result of the extraordinary manifestations of unrest characteristics of the past decades. The state themselves, as usual, under such circumstances, passed many laws adding safeguards for the master and restrictions upon the slave and free Negroes. This, like the preceding revolts and plots, were part of the backgrounds of Southern life prior to the outbreaks led by Nat Turner and the panic and terror and insubordination that follows throughout the South until the end of the full year of 1831. In 1930, North Carolina and Louisiana passed laws forbidding the teachings of the art of writing and reading to slaves, while Georgia had extended similar provisions to all Negroes a year before. Virginia in April 1831 prohibits the assembly of the free Negroes for purposes of insurrection and reading and writing. From 1829 to spring of 1831, the state of Georgia, North Carolina, and Mississippi passed laws providing very heavy penalties for any individual deaf for Negroes engaged in dissemination of anti-slavery propaganda. During the same period, North Carolina and Georgia enacted quarantines laws for all ships carrying free Negroes. The period of quarantines to last for 30 to 40 days, respectively. If that sounds familiar, y'all will know soon. Many precautionary acts of the malicious characters were passed during the same period. Thus, North Carolina passed law punishing any who abide runaway slaves, providing for measures to combat maroons, forbidding the cohabitation of the free Negroes and Negroes and slaves, and the marriage of free Negroes and whites. Louisiana required all Negroes free since 1825 to leave, and North Carolina ordered all Negroes emancipated after 1830 to leave within 90 days. I wonder why. There was another type of political activities relating to slavery during the period immediately preceding Turner's attempt at revolution. In Kentucky, efforts were made during the closing months of 1829 to hold a constitutional convention. One of the objects of the unsuccessful backers of this movement was the abolishment of slavery. In 1830, a bill for the purpose was introduced in the House of this state, but in consideration was postponed indefinitely by a vote of 18 to 11. The agitations over the question of constitutional convention in Kentucky moved Hezekiah Niles, the influential Maryland publisher, to declare, "We have no desire to meddle with the general question of slavery. It must be met sometimes through, probably not in our days, and very shortly, and to a considerable extent because of the terror invoked by a diminutive slavery-hating black man living near Jerusalem, now Cortland, Virginia. This idea of postponement, indifference, neutrality was to lose ground, and the generation of crisis was to appear." And that concludes chapter 11, sections 1 and 2. In my reflection, it seemed to me there were free blacks, some that served as slaves and some that were free already. But it goes further that if you're free black, they want you to go not away from your master, but from the city itself and probably the town or state within 30 to 90 days, depending on which state you're in. And the reason for this, from my understanding, is that you have the potential to free other slaves. So I'm not sure where I hear this notion that why is an issue that black people will always come back and try to save other blacks. This is always within you as a male, as a black man and black woman. This never left you. So anytime if you experience prosperity and freedom and all that stuff, you will have the capacity to go back and free others. Because you are not what we like to call an individual. You operate as a collective. You might not operate as a collective now in the 21st century, but it's going to come to a point you will operate like that again in hard times. And another thing, there were very much laws preventing a lot of Negroes to read and write. And we all know this goes further than the 1700s. This is probably what's going on around the 1800s from what the book has revealed. And mind you, I could be wrong. These bills and these certain laws were put into place probably a century in advance. But at the end of the day, the purpose of not having you read and write is because you could sign yourself out of freedom. As you know, in the next chapter, it's going to go in a little bit more in the history of a particular slave, which I will not reveal till you catch the next broadcast. But it's going to go into more of what he has done that actually changed America pretty much forever and changed how slavery was going to be conducted here in America. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you again for listening to tonight's stream. Always, you could comment, subscribe, and like this video. Thank you for listening. Till next time, take care.